and welcome to episode 11 of Getting Creative with Laetro. We're your hosts, Andrew Sale, and none other than the magnanimous Dave Zaboski. Hey, Dave.
Hey, Andrew, it's good to see you. Happy to be here.
It is good to see you again. Your bright, shining face. It lets me know that we are where we need to be. This is the show that's all about the collaborative crossroads of marketing and brands and the creatives and storytellers that they work with. We've been getting some amazing feedback from you all about the show. And so first and foremost, thank you. Thank you so much for the kind words. But we'd also love to hear from you about who you would like to see on the show. And so if there's somebody that maybe you're a marketer and you say, hey, I have something that I want to contribute to the show. You've got expertise. You've been in this world. You've been in this industry and you want to raise your hand. Hey, we'd love to hear from you. But if you maybe know a marketer or you know somebody who's in these industries and you want them to be on the show, just tag them in the comments so that they know to come here and let us know that you want us to talk to them and we can chat them up because the more the merrier, right, Dave? We want to continue to learn.
That's exactly it. Like we're a couple of creative guys who are here to learn. Like, how does marketing work? What's the day-to-day? How do you get better creative from the creatives? We're on the creative side, and I got a ton of questions for you. So
yes,
let's figure out how we can bring more creativity into the world and get more creative. And yeah, we're here to learn. So if you got information, help us.
Yeah, let us know, and we will reach out and we will set up a time to chat. But today, we are joined by somebody who is no stranger to the marketing world. We're talking with copywriter James Hart. James has worked in several facets in the writing world, from journalism all the way to the editing room. And after completing his creative writing master's program in Australia, he moved back to the U.S. and has worked on projects with folks like Bicycling Magazine, CVS, and U.S. News and World Report. We're going to talk with him about his story and we're going to get to know his work, but we're also going to talk about what the future looks like for writers in a world where AI and Chat GPT are really gaining ground. So before any of that, let's get to know the guy who is self-admittedly funnier in retrospect, James Hart. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome James to the show.
Yeah, welcome.
No, it's hey. How's it going?
We are doing well. How are you, James? That's the better question.
Yeah, I'm doing really good. You know, the weather's starting to brighten up a little bit, so it's good to go outside after like a back and forth kind of winter, so doing well.
Awesome. Well, here's what we want to do. We want to spend the next few minutes getting to know you. We want to talk about your work, but we have to start at a baseline, right? We have to start with who James is. So give us the Wikipedia page about who you are.
Okay, well, I have been doing the writing things for quite a while, and that's meant very different things, over the years, I guess. I started with like editing and journalism, and then, I started shifting into marketing and doing a lot of content writing. Now I do a whole lot of copywriting, and that's primarily what I'm working on now, but it's just anything word related is kind of what I do now. And, it's, how it started was kind of funny. I didn't initially go to school for it. I had an environmental science degree. And so I worked as a scientist for like a year or two before I started getting into writing. So it was kind of an early shift. Yeah.
Well, we were talking a little bit before the show started about some of the why that you're here, like you love words, and your career has kind of crossed a bunch of disciplines, from journalism to copywriting to marketing, which are really kind of different things. Like if you're a swimmer, one's breaststroke, one's the butterfly, one's the crawl. Like these are different disciplines. What is it that you feel is like at the root of your calling to be able to use words to describe the world?
Yeah, it's mostly stories, and basically every single facet of what I've worked on, it's basically telling some kind of story. I think stories are really important. They're how we really relate to one another and ingest information. We tend to learn more from stories than facts do, and it's just a very old part of who we are, and that got a hold of me really early on. Before I knew I was going to be doing it for a living. My last semester at school, I was finishing up my bachelor's for environmental science, and I had a gap between when my rent was going to end and I was going to start living somewhere else for my last semester. in a buddy's place. He did not pay the electric bill. So it was really hot I think it was like early August before like semester started. And I couldn't plug anything in. I had nothing to do. So I went to the library. And I didn't really, a lot of other people who work in the writing discipline, they have a good story about how, they've always been into writing. They used to, write things when they were kids. I read a lot. I wasn't a big writer. I kind of got by in my English classes. But when I went to the library there, I picked up an Isaac Asimov book. My dad was a big Isaac Asimov fan. And it was called The Early Asimov. It was the first stories he worked on. And I had this like crazy moment, that Stephen King talks about a lot. If you ever become a writer, you've probably had this experience where you read something and you're just like, this isn't that great. Could I do this? Well, this got published. Like, how bad would my first ones be? And so when I started working with my environmental science degree, at night I was writing short stories, and just I'd stay up way late just working on my own writing, and it became just like this compulsion. I wanted to get better, and it turns out actually my first stories were terrible, like that they weren't that great, but I loved doing it, and I got so much out of reading the work of others and what they were trying to do. And it got me hooked. And
sorry. Yeah, who were some of your other storytellers? I heard a quote once that said that stories are what got us out of the trees and into the libraries. Who were some of your other storytellers?
Oh man, so I had because my dad taught astronomy, so he was big into science fiction. So I grew up reading Douglas Adams, Robert Heinlein, a lot of the old school stuff, Carl Sagan. And I loved all of that. Now, I got into, we'll get to when I got my master's. I'm big into poetry now too. And I love narrative stories. That's why I'm a big Robert Frost fan too. Plus, he talks a lot about the environment. I've always been big into the outdoors too. So I kind of resonate with that. But, I have a big love of movies too. I love movies of any and all types of genres. It's, my tolerance for what I'm willing to watch is a lot greater than my wife says. She's a really good sport because, hey, let's check out this weird thing. And, she'll go
along for the
sport of it. Yeah. So, so it was really stories.
Nice. And I want to ask, apropos of what you just said there, I noticed in some of your posts, like there's this distinction between being a gourmand and a gourmet. In French, it means like the gourmand is someone who just eats all of this stuff, and the gourmet is someone who tastes it and figures out like, what's the recipe in this? Does this have a little tarragon in it, And I noticed that like, that you play that role on both sides a little bit, like how to watch a Super Bowl commercial, but also like how to see like what's truly going on in these things. When you say like you consume movies, where do you land as a storyteller on that, gourmand or gourmet? Can you turn it off and just say, I'm going to enjoy this? Or do you kind of go, oh, there's a story point, or that's a thing, like how does that work for you?
I cannot turn it off, at least for me. I'm always thinking about, how something was made, and just like the nitty gritty of, just how the storytelling works. But at the same time, it doesn't take away from my enjoyment of it, even when you watch movies that aren't really necessarily all that great. They might have been hyped a lot, but they kind of are lowered in your expectations. I can still have a lot of fun with it because I can see what they were trying to do. And, you guys would know this a lot more than I do. Like, movies are hard. They're really hard to make and produce. And so, I can see the effort for what it is. And typically, like, I always learn something from watching it. Like, so I can't help but nitpick and look at sort of the how they did it and what they were aiming for. But it doesn't detract from the fun for me. It actually, it makes it more enriching to see it from that way.
Do you feel like when you're dissecting things that way, when you're critiquing is maybe a little bit more of an industry word for it, but when you're dissecting and critiquing these films or whatever it is, the writings that you're taking in, these different media, Do you think that comes from having a science, like a upbringing of a father who was into science and who was an astronomer? Do you think that plays into it?
Yeah, I found that in the writing world, probably in other creative industries too, people approach it from maybe two different spots. There are very analytical people, and they can sort of learn to leverage their analytical mind to kind of learn the nuts and bolts of how the writing might work. And then you have intuitive folks who just they kind of train their ear for what works and what doesn't. I definitely started as an analytical person. That's just kind of how I was wired. But after with a lot of practice, I'm getting better with the intuition side of things. But at least for me personally, that's my natural tendency. I tend to focus on kind of like the nuts and bolts of it. But I think other people, they can just kind of more intuitively, they might not be able to articulate it as well, but they get the vibe of something very quickly, especially with advertising and marketing. Some people are just very good with getting the right tone right off the bat. Other people kind of have to work at it, but it's kind of two different ways of approaching it.
Yeah, that
Nice.
makes sense.
Yeah, so I want to ask you too, like you've been a journalist and a copywriter, and those seem like two really different disciplines. How would you define the two of them, and how do you make the transition between each one?
Yeah, in terms of definitions, at least with journalism, I think it's a misconception that journalism is like just the facts, man, kind of thing, and I don't necessarily agree with that because there is some interpretation that has to happen with something. A journalist has to go in and find out what a story is. They refer to them as stories. And so when I worked with, I started doing, my own articles. I love the fact that, what was the line from, I think it was The Paper, like every day you always start from zero. And I love that. I love not knowing what the story was and having to get all the relevant facts together to figure out what this means. And for another audience, what does it mean for them? With doing marketing work and copywriting, it's more like you have a story that you want to tell, but you don't necessarily know right off the bat what would be relevant to the audience. You have to learn about them and just how does the overlap happen between their needs and the story you're trying to tell? Like, how does this help them? And so,
driven by curiosity at the core for each side.
Absolutely, yeah. And the more I feel like the more you know about your audience, the better off you're always going to be. I harp on that a lot on LinkedIn, but with journalism, if you know your audience better, like once you get new facts about a story, it's like, oh, well, this is really important. People need to know this. And with the copywriting side of things, the more you know your audience, the more you can help them. And that's how I view it. And just like telling the right kind of story so that they understand what you're about, and that how you can provide a service to them. So yeah, it's very much that.
So both of them come from a place of research, but how does that transcend? Do you do any fictional writing? Does that transfer into any sort of like, telling us like a fictional story, not trying to meet people where they're at or trying to share someone else's story that would be more journalistic? Do you try to ever take that to that next phase where it's based on fiction, it's based on something that you're creating in your own mind?
Sure. You can't see it, but I have a stack of stuff here I'm currently working on. Like I've been working on, poetry for a while. You'll see that creep in with some of my LinkedIn stuff. I can't help but to write poems here and there. And I like working on narrative poems. And with that, like things that are like creative writing, you kind of start with, instead of what does this mean for the audience or what does this mean for the people you're trying to reach, I sort of ask internal questions like, what does this mean for me? And then I try to express it in a way that could be understood by others. But I have to start with, well, what do I think this means? Because I feel like I can't write about it effectively if I don't understand it first. So it's kind of solving my own puzzles, but then, polishing it up in a way that I can share it with somebody else. And there's a communication that can happen there. But
sorry, I was just gonna say, I always feel like really powerful art is the creative's way of connecting so deeply to themselves that it starts to resonate outwards.
Yeah.
The poet David White, I think, is really interesting because he's doing a lot of corporate work. So it sort of relates in a way to what you're talking about. This idea that poetry is a language that allows for two things to exist at the same time that most other language systems don't, right? So like you can have and he talks a lot about bringing poetry and the language of poetry into the corporate world, because the corporate world really has this like A-B system, like, two things that are in opposition can't exist in the same place at the same time, whereas in poetry they can. So his take is that corporations have the power, but they don't have the language. And poetry has the language, but it doesn't have the power. So if you could bring more poetry into the corporate world, and I think that is a little bit where copywriting lives, then you have the opportunity to create something that allows for an evolution. So an evolution is a place where there's two things that exist at the same time that may be slightly oppositional. And so I think that's what I love, that you're in poetry as well as these sort of more technical kinds of writing.
Yeah, and it's not unheard of. The poet laureate for California, Dana Gioia, I think he was the first poet to be president of the NEA. If he wasn't the first, he was, one of the few who became president of NEA. He was I think he was a vice president of marketing for the General Foods Corporation, but he's also a poet. And so he's been very serious about, advocating for creative writing, especially for local communities. And he's done a whole lot for his community to just sort of, let people understand that, poetry it's not still relevant. It might even become, more relevant as, I think our need for good stories being told and sharing stories becomes more important.
Well, and poetry is such a broad, I think people have such a mindset of what they think poetry is. And we've put poetry in a box. At least for me growing up, poetry was always just da-da-da-da-da, 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 right? Like that's what you learn growing up. And of course you learn that there are different methods, but poetry really transcends all, by definition, transcends all definition, right? Like it can be the ultimate expression through words, and that's really it. And the form that it takes, the method that it takes is really doesn't matter. It's to the poet who's expressing it to decide whether or not this is a piece of poetry or a piece of journalism, right? Like it's for the person who's creating it to determine that. You've worked for companies like CVS and, like we said, like the World News and things like that. How have you worked that voice into your professional, more, I'm going to do air quotes here, serious writing? How have you worked your poetry bent and your love of creative writing into that?
Yeah, that's a good question. Especially with copywriting, there's always the problem of space and time. You're very often trying to relate to an audience who doesn't necessarily owe you anything yet. You have to earn their trust and attention. And so you have to very quickly get to the point, provide something that's of value to them first and foremost. And so it's really similar. I love the word game aspect of writing. I love working with constraints. And the constraints are different, but the types are kind of similar, How can you relate to somebody very quickly? How can you write something that's very impactful, but very clear and easy to understand, and just, direct, clear communication? And so the aims are a little bit different, but, the ultimate goal is the same, having a clear impact with your audience in a very efficient way. And so that's really helped me a lot with the copywriting side of things. What really helps with that too is just, again, knowing who you're talking to and kind of where they're coming from their end. The more empathy you have for your audience, the easier it is to, write something that's impactful for them, because you're putting, their needs at the forefront. And so that's really kind of, a quick hack, I guess. If you're trying to write something that, resonates with more and more people, get to know who you're trying to communicate with more.
right? Empathy, intuition, creativity, human characteristics. And there are tools now that are less than human, but that may also be pretty effective in this space. I suppose if that's all right, maybe we wander into some of those waters here.
Let's wander into the uncharted territories of artificial. Is it artificial intelligence? Dave, you have a good setup for this, so I'm going to let you lead the charge on this because you've been behind the scenes in our personal conversations. You've been kind of carrying this banner for the last several weeks on like, where do we live in this space? How do we feel about it? Where are we really at war with the machines, or is there a harmony to be struck? And so I'm going to let you kind of lead us into those waters.
Well, all right. Yeah. I mean, I've been thinking about this for a minute here. I actually wrote an article in 2016 about artificial intelligence. And I got to tell you, I still don't know where we are. It's confusing. James and I, we and Andrew, we were talking just before we started, like, it's moving really fast. 3 weeks ago, I hated it. 2 weeks ago, I was like, okay, it might be workable. Today, not so sure again. Tomorrow, I might love it. It's, there's an article I just read about the research that's going on at Stanford where in 2018, the first Chat GPT tested the same as about an 8-year-old in the theory of mind and its sort of cognitive understanding of things. And then now it's at about a 12-year-old in about 2 or 3 years, and it's an exponential acceleration. So
it has surpassed me, is what you're saying.
Well, exactly.
We're now it is now cognitively stronger than Andrew Sale. Okay, cool.
Yeah. Well, but it doesn't have as nice a smile.
Thank you. And that's I was fishing.
Yeah, there you go.
Come on, Dave.
So it's moving pretty fast. In a couple of years, it'll probably have this sort of theory of mind or cognitive development of a college student, where it can follow Kurt Vonnegut's 7 rules of how to write and all of these things. But can it break those rules like a college student? And so I think that there are some interesting spaces. I'll sort of just leave you with this. We've been told that there are kind of 3 choices with AI. The first is to constrain it, which you might see in places like military or government. The second is to collaborate with it, which we are probably doing. Did we lose James?
I think we did. I hope he comes back. Looks like his screen froze. We're just going to banter for a second, Dave. We're just going to vamp. That's what we call it.
I'll stop on number 2.
Yeah, we'll stop with number 2. And we'll hope that James rejoins us in a moment. In the meantime, I do want to...
I just want to say the technology is fantastic, but clearly it's not complete.
It knows we're talking about it. That's the thing.
That's what happened. Dave's about to lay some truth on AI. If my screen goes out, then we know there's something going on.
Yeah, if it is, then I've already got a go bag. I've got a go bag. I'm ready to head to the tools, my friend.
Where are you going to go?
I'm going to shut my phone off for sure. I know that for sure. Yeah. I am interested, Dave, while we wait for James to come back. I'm interested about your perspective on working with writers, because you're trained as an animator, right? You worked as an animator with Disney for many years. And you were working to express the writing that these writers were doing. How did that relationship work between you and the writers' room?
Well, in the same way that it does with an actor and a writer, we as animators, we were sort of actors in slow motion, like 24 drawings a second, but we still had a performance to deliver. And so, you had the sound of the actor that voiced it, and then we were the sort of physical embodiment of that performance. It's an incredibly collaborative process, as James was saying before the AI took him out. It's hard to make a movie, and so there are all of these really interwoven collaborative processes to it. We're a little bit more constrained because we get the final take. And so we're using that final take to create from. So my freedom is in, well, he might move like this or he might move like that. So I'm really the mime behind the the dialogue. And in smaller productions, there really is a back and forth. The writer comes up with an idea and then it gets storyboarded. And you might say in writing, and they sat by a lovely sunset descending on the horizon, right? But then you can draw that and you don't need to say that anymore, right? So the picture paints 1,000 words. So there is this real ping pong match, this sort of back and forth to look at where can you eliminate or maybe make more eloquent those words so that the images and the words balance each other. And I think we see that in sequential work, in comic books, in copywriting, in a lot of different places, is that, you know, we're pretty visual. So how do we create that balance between that dance between the word, the image, and the feeling it is supposed to engender?
Yeah, I want to be sensitive to the idea that it is a full-on collaboration, right? So it's not like there's one who is the like, it's not one person doing everything, and then the other parts are writing coattails. But would you say there's a ratio spent to how a great movie comes to fruition, right? How is there a ratio of it's 70% this, 30% this? Is it like, is there a magic number, or is it truly 50-50 when it comes to how you find the right balance for this?
Well, yeah, I don't think that there's a magic formula. The director generally has the vision, and so that's who's driving it. But then the director hands things off to the cinematographer, to the storyboard artist, to the art director. You know, the 3-time Academy Award-winning cinematographer Conrad Hall is a friend of our family's, and I talked to him once about it, and you know, he would have his assistants set up a shot, and he'd go, "Well, I want this to feel like this," and then they would set up the shot, and he would look through the lens and go, "Yeah, that works." You know, is he the cinematographer? Is it like, so there's this like handoff, this trust that happens in this kind of spiral of creation where you're constantly handing something off. The only real formula that I've ever heard is Sergio Pablos from Sergio Pablos Animation. He did the Minions and Gru and Klaus, and it's really extraordinary. Yeah. Really doing beautiful, beautiful traditional and CG work out of his studio in Madrid. And he says, and I can't remember exactly what the numbers are, but the one formula that he goes by is that a movie has to have 35 laughs, 2 cries, 1 for sadness and 1 for happiness, and then a great big awe. Something like that, right? And so like that's kind of his formula. And if you look at Klaus, like, I don't know that you would go, "Hey, this needs to bump up the laugh a little bit." I think at places like Disney, when we brought the gargoyles into Hunchback of Notre Dame, I think we were trying a little too hard for something like that. But there is this kind of science to story where you are looking for sort of a chemical reaction that has a sweet to it. You know, like, I'm intense and I'm curious, and then I'm relieved, and then I get my serotonin and my dopamine. And so there is a kind of process or science to that storytelling.
There's an algorithm, it sounds like.
There's it's an algorithm of story, if you will. Mm-hmm. It's not just movie making, but it's how stories work, you know?
And it's why songs don't work if they're just one note, right? Like if it's just one note over and over and over again, at least it needs a second note so it has something to counter.
Right. Well, I think you hit on something exactly. If you look at like symphonies, for example, they have movements to them, and they start with, say, a lento, or a slow movement at the beginning. It kind of pulls you in, but it's containing some of the themes that are going to be present later on. You can think about a symphony as a story, and then those themes sort of emerge with more and more vivacity as the symphony carries on. And then there's this denouement, this kind of, in French, that word means to unknot something. And so there's this sort of untying of things, and those themes resolve.
So wait, is on that idea though, is the idea that everything starts as a knot, and the idea of, it's kind of like with Michelangelo, right? He sees the person inside, and he just chips away until that person is revealed. Is it like that?
Oh, I think we got James coming back.
We do have James back.
All right. And so, bring him back in and we'll answer that question. Hi, James.
Speaking of technology not working very well for you.
Yeah, Skynet took you out there. We're just about, he decided that we're not going to talk about AI at all.
It clearly
Don't make it angry.
What happened?
Don't make it angry.
Poke the bear.
It's all right.
Bear spelled B-A-I-R.
Yes. It was okay. We had an opportunity to gain a little insight from Dave. So no issues. We're good to go. So back on that topic, Dave, why don't you set us up again, the 1 and the 2 and the 3?
All right, great. So yeah, with AI, basically there's sort of 3 choices that we've been told we have. That one is that we can constrain it, like I said, in military uses or government uses where we don't want the AI to go Skynet on us, right? So we have some constraints on its choices. We can collaborate with it, which is what a lot of the things that are happening now with ChatGPT and DALL-E and Midjourney and those things. Or we can defer to it, which is what a lot of stuff happens also, where you just sort of do a prompt and then now I've got a book cover. And so constrain, collaborate, or defer. And I wonder if there is a 4th choice. Like maybe that 4th choice is we choose not to use it because of the process that allows for that intuition that you were talking about, that allows for that creativity and that poetry. There are benefits to the toil of creation that allow for an emergence of new ideas rather than just a regurgitation or an amalgamation of the collective, I don't want to say intelligence, but the collective product that humans have dumped into the internet. But it is an interesting landscape that is being developed. And I'd be interested for you as a writer to understand how you see your present and potential future with a tool that could facilitate, but also eliminate a process by which the things that you love, poetry, intuition, and creativity, come about.
Yeah, I guess I'll start off by saying I have no idea, definitively like where we're going. And, I'm as curious as everybody else, I suppose. I guess we're all trying to navigate this together as, new developments happen. But I'm kind of reminded of, I was talking to my advisor when I was getting my my poetry masters. And I was kind of like downtrodden about the fact that, like Andrew said earlier, like poetry is kind of in a box and how it's not really reaching out to people as well as it could. You used to see new poems published in newspapers and things. And now, newspapers are online. You don't need a whole lot. And he just looked at me, kind of laughed and said, look, poetry's not going anywhere. And I was like, what do you mean? He said, it's old as the hills. It's older than written language. And so it's going to be around for a really long time. New manifestations of it will be interesting, but it's a lot more resilient and malleable than you think. And so I think that's where, we have been kind of working with human stories and storytelling and relating to one another through stories for such a long time. I really don't think that's going away. We have such a long track record of that as people, before we started writing things down, we were telling stories. So I think it's going to be a matter of, we will use new tools. It's kind of like, we do have fast food restaurants now. They're very fast and, expedient, and they do get the job done. But fast food restaurants haven't taken out, fine dining experiences. That's a way to look at it too. So just in terms of new technology replacing, how we used to do stuff, I think it'll augment it, not really replace it. And I think one thing we will be really starved of, especially with Dave talking about, how these tools as they are now just kind of aggregate what it's been able to find in terms of source material. We're going to be starved for human connections. We're going to have, just so much choice in terms of where we give our attention to. And there's going to be so much content to relate to out there. Finding something that really speaks to us, it's like, what did Ray Bradbury say? What do you do when you look for when you go into the library? You're looking for yourself. You want to pull a book off the shelf and say, "Here I am." And so, I think it's really similar just in terms of human connection. So, to the extent that these tools will help us find ways to still tell human stories, I think we'll be fine. In terms of people who use it as a shortcut to just, well, I want it to do all the expression for me, I think that will work in the very short term, but I think we're going to get tired of that kind of communication pretty soon.
Right. Noam Chomsky is 94 years old, and he said that he had this insight around AI, specifically the art making tools. And he said, people say, hey, this stuff it makes making art easier. And his take is, it's actually not about making art, it's about avoiding making art. And I thought that was really interesting that you use these tools to create images, and the images are pretty stunning. They're pretty spectacular. And they're not made by someone who went through the process, who had a lot of discovery, who they're a way to avoid making art. And I thought that was pretty salient. I probably won't use AI because I love the process, but I do see that it is a tool that can facilitate a lot of what it is that we do.
It being void of human expression, I don't think there's going to be any level of artificial intelligence that's going to be able to bridge that gap. Regardless, like at the end of the day, there will always be some disconnect between man and machine, or human and machine, right? And I think what you're saying is a pretty interesting insight, because I didn't think about it in the terms of fast food restaurant versus like fine dining, right? There is something to be said about, yeah, you can go and have someone on, and I don't want to disparage anybody or anything, but like you can go have someone create a logo on Fiverr, or you can go work with some of these people who have intrinsic knowledge and understanding of brands and marketing and what it takes to communicate a message, and have something that's tailored just for you that does exactly what you need to do and tells your story. Those are very different things. And there is a potential place in the market for both of those things. It just depends on, do you want Taco Bell, or do you want to go sit down and have a 5-star meal, right? There's a difference there. It's a unique perspective that I hadn't thought about before. Would you consider tapping into and utilizing AI to help you in like practices, like when you're running any sort of practices, to give you, maybe to generate prompts for you or anything like that? Is that something that you've considered as a tool for the writing process?
Yeah, I've been messing around with Chat GPT a little bit, and it's interesting because already, I mean, it's only a couple months old. People are using it for different things. And how people seem to talk about it is, if they're talking about it in a positive way, they like the fact that it takes the thing about the writing process they don't like off the table. Some people, it's the nuts and bolts stuff of just like fleshing things out, and like that's what they're getting to help with. For other people, it's the iterative process itself, just coming up with, for example, a social media post or things like that. I actually love every part of the writing process. And so I really like the hard work of it. So I've been messing around a little bit with really just ideation a little bit. And it helps in terms of, the more you work on a project, the more you tend to get tunnel vision, because you're kind of staying within the same parameters a lot. Yeah. And so for me, it's kind of helped me on a very high level, just like take a step back for a little bit, like, here are maybe some things like you haven't considered. But in terms of, the writing itself, I don't think it's quite there yet. Mm-hmm. Who knows? I mean, it might get that way, but, at least for me right now, it's really helped me like see things from slightly different perspectives. But in terms of, just going in and, from a marketing perspective, understanding your audience, figuring out what resonates with them the most, that is not something at this point that Chat GPT can really help with. Probably after a while, it'll help us with some of our research too. But, there's nothing like, just the old school method of just talking to people, figure out what they're about. So I think, like I said, it's going to augment, what we used to do, not necessarily replace it, at least in the short term. Who knows in the long term where we're headed?
Well, it's accelerating and it's getting better at what it does. though I think that a signature matters. And I think what you're saying too is that a deep connection also matters. And so maybe that's one of the upshots of it, is that it does become kind of fast food, or it offers a shortcut to the place where you actually then have to do the real work, the human work.
Yeah. Quick service versus full service, right? Like what you can get, a la carte versus a full experience, a full dining experience, I think is a great way to think about it.
We're still a long way from what they call general artificial intelligence. I mean, the neurotransmitters for the human brain have, I don't know, 100 billion connections, and that's like 100x away from it where we are right now. So even the self-driving vehicles, it's not really that possible right now. Like if a leaf falls in front of your car, is it a leaf? Is it a cat? What kind of cat? Is it a calico cat? Is it like the AI just does not have the variations to understand what's going on there. And so we've seen some promises that aren't fulfilled. And I think that we're in this kind of honeymoon space right now where it's like, oh, it's going to take care of everything. And then, there's just a lot of hype around it. And I think that there's some turbulent waters that will settle as we start to figure out what this tool really is.
Yeah. And James, you said something at the top of all of this stuff where you were saying that this is like built into you. The idea of writing and finding story is built into you. Can you just take a moment and express what that means? Like communicate what that means, that this is built in. Like you look at it. Bianca said in the comments, she said sometimes the experience gets lost in the sauce. Sometimes we just do enjoy creating something for the sake of itself, not for the end result, but simply for the process. And you said something similar to that. I don't remember if it was in this conversation or if it was just before we started recording, where you talked about this being innately in you. And this is a part of just who you are. What does that mean when it comes to writing for you?
Well, I've had a lot of questions, just about where my career trajectory might go, especially with the advent of, new AI technology. And, I'm asking, like, is this really for me? Is this something I should be doing? The interesting thing is, if I'm working on a project and I might not know which way to go, there might be a couple different options for things I could present. I get excited because then I'm allowed to do like all three. That's what excites me the most. And whatever happens from that, I'm not really as excited about finished work. I mean, it's always nice to see like the fruits of your labor and like maybe even to get recognition. But for me, where it's at is the making of it. And, just really using that to sort of connect to people. And so, yeah, just last night I was working, pretty late on a project. And like, the subject matter could have been considered like, a little boring, maybe, not really appeal to everybody. And it was really just nuts and bolts stuff, looking at, just fine tuning like the editing stuff. And I was thinking about it and I'm like, I think maybe most people would hate this, just sitting in like, my kitchen table alone, just doing this tedious work. But I love doing that. I love working on writing, and basically with me, with stories, basically all kind of writing communication. You're trying to convey some kind of a story. You're trying to relate to somebody, or a lot of times with storytelling, how I see it is you're kind of taking somebody on a trip. You have some stuff over here you want them to see or experience. And for them to go over to meet you where you're at, and then to come back, they've learned something from that process, even if it's something as fast as looking at a billboard. So I think that's so important, and that's just something that enriches me always. Just working on that process and just sort of paving the road out for different routes that people can go and something they can learn. And so for me, like that's the part of it. If I can find tools to help me, do that maybe a little faster or get me new insight about how to do it better, that's great. But I would never want it to be a replacement, of that process. Yeah, and I also don't think it would work. We want to relate to, other people more than we do something that was, put together kind of artificially. We want to see the people behind the message.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect point to this idea of collaboration, right? You are a writer, and you're in your house right now, or you're in your office, you're in your studio, wherever it is that you do your work. And like a lot of people right now, they're doing work remotely and they can do it from wherever they want in the world. However, there's a downside to that, which is isolation, and isolation can creep up on you, and isolation can kill creativity. And so tell me tell us about the importance of finding community to help build those things and bounce ideas off of, and find that connection so that you can actually build in yourself so that you can pour out in your work. How important is community to you, and where are you finding that?
I couldn't do it without that. It's so essential to the process. It's so essential because I find if I'm not, there's different kinds of collaboration. There's collaborating with team members, and that's one thing. And one thing I like doing is talking to people who aren't writers themselves, and just like, well, what do you think of this? And they might not have like the background to tell me why something doesn't work or anything like that, but their expression and their emotional reaction tells me everything I need to know. So that's really helpful. But in terms of other kinds of collaboration, I find that if I don't read a whole lot, if I'm kind of stagnant with watching new films, like checking out other creative works from other agencies, like just some cool ads that I've seen. If I don't do that on a regular basis, it's really hard for me to write. I don't feel like I have anything that is inspiring me so much. And so just seeing, I think creativity inspires creativity. And so, just getting that kind of charge from other people and what they do is really important too. But, it
sounds like one of your practices is to continually resource yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And a lot of it's not too one-to-one, I get a lot of inspiration from music too. Just, things I'm listening to. I stole my dad's old records the last time I went down to visit him in Florida, so I had to get a record player, play those. And just some of the lyrics too. It's like, well, they don't write like that anymore. That's an interesting turn of phrase or whatever. Movies too. There's obviously a lot of stuff I like to read, but just learning from others, ads can do the trick too. But I read a lot of graphic novels too, and I love graphic novels because it's mostly an illustration, and there's such an economy of space with the words that you really have to get the words down properly.
As a fan of sandboxes, yeah.
We were talking a little bit about that when the AI took you out.
Yeah.
Do you have like sketchbooks or notebooks or journals where you capture, like if there's something that you go, oh, that's a jewel, and did you pull on it?
Here's one. Here's another one. Here are a couple more.
So no is your answer.
Right. As a pro, you have at least 4 different journals within reach in this very moment. That's great.
At any time, he can grab 4 different capturing devices. I love it.
Yeah, and they're all themed. I stopped, it became a mess just having one notebook, and it was just I couldn't make heads or tails of what I wrote down a couple weeks ago. So they all have loose themes. So it's my own personal writing that I'm working on. Cool ideas that I saw other people do, neat campaigns that I thought, man, that was a great idea. Just lists of stuff I want to check out, books, movies, albums I might want to check out, those kinds of things. So yeah, I have at least 4 running around. I think there's 1 or 2 more somewhere else. But that's constant because I know if I don't write it down, I'll never remember.
And Bianca here says approximately 11 journals.
11 journals.
Yeah.
And Bianca's
going to be 11 dozen.
She knows because she's a writer that she's in the same boat as you. I've heard it said from a friend of mine, you can't pour out of an empty cup, and you are constantly having to fill your cup. As a creative, as anybody trying to put anything out into the world, you're having to fill your cup, and it sounds like you're filling it up with all sorts of different flavors from different faucets from different places to hopefully become an amalgamation of all these things, and so you can put something new that is wholly original and wholly unique based on all these different inputs. But I do have to ask one question, as philosophical as that all sounds. Is one of your notebooks in your bathroom? Because if it's not, I think you're missing an opportunity.
Right now, right this second, maybe not. Otherwise, this one carries me everywhere. Like I find it in all the rooms of the house, like whenever I just happen to be working downstairs, upstairs somewhere. So on any given week, yes, it could be in the bathroom. Right now, it happens to be beside me, but don't let that fool you. It's found everywhere. Yeah.
That sounds great.
Hey, James, what does the future hold for you? Like, what's a perfect project for you to work on? And what do you see as the sort of aim for your career? You have a lot of fiction. You've done a lot of work in a bunch of different disciplines. What sparks you now, and what's the light that you're heading for?
I guess looking back on the stuff I've worked on already, it's really just I like trying to use storytelling to solve interesting and important challenges. So, that's really what lights me up really well, especially new ones, and the nice thing is things are changing so much, so fast that we're going to have no shortage of new challenges to overcome. And so I like being able to, use my writing abilities to just kind of, work on that. I love trying out new possibilities. And like I said, just ways to connect with people. And so, ideal projects for me are just, working on things I haven't necessarily worked on before, trying to learn more about people I might not have connected with before, and trying out new things. I love the novelty aspect of just trying out a new project. And so I'm trying to keep things kind of high level and general right now, just to see how things unfold with, all these new technologies, that nuts and bolts of it, it's kind of hard to see that far out of how it's going, but I suspect I'll probably be doing what I've always, been doing, just maybe using different tools or in a different context. But there's going to be an element of just connecting with people and just trying to tell good stories.
That's I think the key to what all of us are trying to do, right? Tell everybody where they can connect with you, where they can follow what you're doing, they can track the work that you're putting out there, and just be able to see who you are and follow you.
Mostly LinkedIn. I hang out on there quite a bit, so you'll see my updates there. That's probably the best way to get a hold of me.
Okay, well, thank you so much for chatting with us. It's important to say in all of this, James, you're part of the Laetro community, and this is one of the places where we are trying to cultivate the connected creative community. That's what we're all about at Laetro. And so thank you for contributing to that community. Thank you for being a part of that. Thank you for caring about it. A lot of this stuff is very much resonating with who we are. And thank you for being a part of that. But if you want to be a part of what is happening within our creative community, if you want to hang out with people like James, or James specifically, because he is in that community, you can head on over into Laetro.com/for-creatives to get that process started, where you can submit your portfolio and get it looked at and be part of our connected creative community. Or maybe you are a marketer and you want to work with someone who's like James, or James specifically, on a project, and you need some copywriting done and you need your story told. Head on over to Laetro.com to begin that conversation with us there. Let us collaborate with you. Let us help you tell your stories with world-class artists, creatives, illustrators, writers, producers from all over the world doing this thing. We really are a connected community from all over the world. It's a global community of super talented people. But you can start right here at Laetro.com. James, thank you again for being a part of this.
James, really appreciate you being here.
Seriously,
thank you.
Dude, even though the technology tried to get to take you out of our lives, we're not going to let it happen. Thanks for pushing through with us.
Yep.
And thanks for pushing through if you were watching online. But for now, we're going to hop out of this episode. Until next time, hey everybody, let's get creative.